Has Nebraska found a starting tackle for 2025? We'll discuss it next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase.
Okay, good morning. I am Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone in Omaha is with me. Nebraska is trending to land an offensive tackle, Connor, a big name, big body, big need for the Huskers. Elijah Pritchett, starting right tackle in 2024 at Alabama, has set a visit this week to Lincoln. He's a guy who could use a change of scenery after 3 years in Tuscaloosa, but at this point, I'm not even sure if that matters to the Huskers. Clearly, a top target for Matt Rhule and Nebraska at this point.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we'll talk about what the why he needs a change of scenery. But as far as Nebraska's standpoint, yeah, I mean, I think you could leave out the part where he's a guy who started at Alabama last year, and people I think would be excited because Nebraska needs bodies. Nebraska definitely needs starter caliber bodies, talent at that position. And I would think that they would need more sort of on top of this. Just this doesn't fill all their needs. It is trying to alleviate some pressure on potentially some other guys. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some caveats with this one. You start with the play where it wasn't necessarily all sunshine and roses for him last year at Alabama. He did start 12 out of the 13 games, most of them at right tackle. He's a big guy. He was like a former 5-star recruit, but he allowed a team high 31 quarterback pressures, 6 sacks, according to Pro Football Focus. And then there's the other stuff, Mitch, which isn't necessarily pretty either.
Yeah, so he was arrested twice in 2024, once for speeding and then once for knowingly transmitting an STD. And for that case, that incident, he was sued in Tuscaloosa by a young woman in the month of December. So he seems to be having a need to get away from some things at Alabama. And I think that, well, I don't know, but it would appear that that's part of the reason for this departure. 3 years at Alabama. This last year, 6'6", 312 pounds, according to his Alabama bio. This last year started, as you mentioned, basically the whole season at right tackle. Started one game at left tackle early in the year when Caden Proctor, the other 5-star tackle on that Alabama offensive line, or one of the other 5-star tackles on that Alabama offensive line, was out with an injury. Pritchett has gone in the portal before. It was a short stay before he went back to Bama. You can look at his recruiting history out of Columbus, Georgia, 5-star prospect in the class of 2022, as 24/7, and Rivals rated him on 3, had him as a 4-star. Regardless, this was a dominant high school offensive lineman. And he visited, out of high school, he visited Bama, Georgia, USC, and Florida State. So if he's coming to Lincoln and he's visiting Lincoln here this week, which that's known, it's not Bama, it's not Georgia. Like, it's going to be cold when he comes in. This is a deal where Nebraska's in this, I would say, because it put together an NIL package that Elijah Pritchett was unable to say, no, thanks.
Right.
I'm going to pass. I'm going to go visit some SEC schools. No, it as Matt Rhule said last month, desperate teams set the market when it comes to NIL and the portal. And that's the place that Nebraska's in right now. We'll talk more in the second segment about just like what is going on at Nebraska on the offensive line and why it so badly needs an offensive tackle. But just in general terms, Nebraska's desperate to make this happen at this point.
Well, you know, it's funny, Mitch, like you just don't, just anecdotally, and I was having this discussion with a guest on my show yesterday, Sam McEwen from the World Herald, and we were talking about how this doesn't happen very often, where you have a lineman from the SEC and from that area of the country, and then later in their career they come north for whatever reason at that position. It doesn't, like, it happens less frequently than all the other positions. So you're right. I think Nebraska had to get, creative, and creative, I say in air quotes, kind of, because it's really just dangling, I think, a whole bunch of money out there. But I think Nebraska had to get somebody's attention. And I don't know if it necessarily mattered like who it was, and not that they're necessarily going to get him, but like you said, Mitch, like they had to sort of put that out there to make him say, hey, yeah, I don't think so. And it doesn't feel like that's happened yet. So they definitely have the interest. It feels like in this case, and we'll see what happens. But Nebraska has struck out on several chances to go get tackles in the portal, and this is the position. This has been the position this offseason that has really, and I think this is probably congruent with other off seasons. The tackle position, the market is way up. It's costing a lot of money to go grab one specific guy at that position. Nebraska's been outbid a couple times, it seems, already. So there's a lot going on out there. But at the end of the day, Nebraska still needs bodies, and I think you and I look at it, fans could look at it. They don't have enough on their roster for where you could go into the season and feel comfortable with it right now. So they're going to have to do this.
Yeah, I wonder if Nebraska's been outbid, or if it's just been a situation where the players that it's gone after at offensive tackle in the portal have just had better options, and
Sure.
It's been a similar kind of money situation. If that's the case, then I think Nebraska's going to have to make an offer that is above market value, in order to make this happen. Or it could be a situation where Pritchett has enough baggage that the options for him are not there. I would think that as a blue chip offensive tackle, that what has happened to him off the field is at a level where a lot of schools are going to look past that. And a lot of schools are going to say, come here, get a fresh start. These are things that he can move past, and it'll all be good. Like, there's a tendency when players are in the portal, and we do this not just with this prospect, but with all kinds of players. You only want to see the good side, and the good side of Elijah Pritchett is that he is extremely talented as an offensive lineman and as a run blocker at Alabama. In talking to some connections that I have at Alabama, and I reached out yesterday to ask about Pritchett, the answer was, yeah, he struggled in pass protection and he struggled against good edge rushers, but you put him in run blocking and he's a road grader. Like, he's a guy who Nebraska would love to have and be able to run behind on probably the left side of the offensive line. Like, I think if he comes to Nebraska, you're probably looking at him as a left tackle. As scary as that might be when he gave up 6 sacks last year, to say, okay, Cincinnati, throw him out there against Cincinnati. When Michigan comes into Lincoln, he's your left tackle. I think that's probably where he would fit at Nebraska in 2025. But again, we'll talk about some of that when we get a little deeper into this discussion about Nebraska's current situation at offensive line.
Yeah. I think it's kind of preferable to the current situation. So we'll definitely take a look at that as we go on throughout the show. Let's sort of break here, and we'll take a look at that situation coming back after the break, and break it all down. Like, all right, who's coming back? What does Nebraska have? How thin is it really for Nebraska on the offensive line right now? We'll do that after this.
All right, a moment here to tell you about Game Time. If you're thinking about attending a game in the college football playoff, there are a couple of semifinals this week. Maybe you're in a city that is hosting one of those. Maybe you're thinking about traveling. Maybe you want to go to the college football playoff championship game. If so, lucky you. Good on you. Remember what Game Time can do for you. There's excitement like nothing else when it comes to going to live events. You make new memories. You get all kinds of experiences that don't happen if you're not in the building. Game Time makes it easier to do that. There's a feature on the Game Time app called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to events even easier. If it's an event, a basketball game, a concert, a live show, whatever it is, sporting events that you want to go to, Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You want to check out the super deal. I love that you can see the seat views before you buy tickets. You go into the app. There's no upfront costs, no surprise fees at checkout. They've got the one-time ticket delivery, lowest price guarantee, gives you complete peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
All right, welcome back. I'm Connor Happer from 1620 The Zone. Mitch Sherman from The Athletic talking about Nebraska's pursuit of Elijah Pritchett, the offensive tackle from Alabama. So let's talk about it just from a football standpoint here and take a look at what Nebraska currently has in their situation going into 2025. Gunnar Gatula started the majority of the games for Nebraska last year after Turner Corcoran went out. We still don't know the status of Turner Corcoran yet. As far as his eligibility for next year. So that's still floating out there. Another one that's floating out there is Teddy Prohaska and his, kind of constant injuries that he's been dealing with throughout his collegiate career. And then there's guys like Tyler Knock, there's Grant Segrin, there's Grant Bricks, just came in last year, but with a whole bunch of talent attached to him, Brock Knutson. It's thin. There's not a lot of guys who have played there, and there's not a lot of guys who you feel confident in at that position. So that should give you a little bit of context as to how important a starter from another Power 5 school would be, regardless if it's Alabama or what is attached to him.
Yeah, too many questions. There's just too many questions at offensive tackle, and the questions that you start with are the injury status of Corcoran and Prohaska. Both of these guys have been through multiple injury situations in their careers, including this last year, 2024. With Corcoran, he could play. He can come back as a sixth-year senior. It's not like he needs a waiver or anything. Javen Wright on the defensive side for Nebraska would need a waiver to come back, and I think he would likely get it if that's something that he pursues. Corcoran's good to go. He can be a sixth-year senior. It's just, are you going to run it back? Is Nebraska going to have a spot for him on the 105-man roster, considering everything that he's dealt with injury-wise over the past 5 seasons? I think the answer to that question would be yes. He's put in a lot of time and energy, invested a ton in the program. He's been a good player when most of the time when healthy. There have been times when he hasn't been a good player, but some of that has been injury related, or he's been frankly out of position. Having him at offensive tackle, it's just not a great option. Even though he played well there, relatively well there at the beginning of the season in 2024.
It's amazing that he's been here for so long, and we've been saying the entire time he's been here that he's a guard, he's an interior offensive lineman, and he's never, the situation has dictated that he's never gotten the opportunity to move to the interior of the offensive line. They've needed him at tackle basically his entire career. So that goes to show you how difficult it is, I think, for Nebraska to get those type of players, or how difficult it has been for them to get and then develop those kind of players, because they've had Corcoran as a safety net, and whatever you think about his play is whatever, but they've had him as a safety net his entire career, and they've needed him every step of the way. So I think that is a really good illustration of what they've sort of had at the position, or what they haven't had really.
I wouldn't feel terribly uncomfortable if Nebraska moved him inside and put him at a guard spot to compete for a guard spot, and then you were able to put Justin Evans at center, because as much as Nebraska needs to find at least one offensive tackle, probably more than one offensive tackle, and this could be finding this. When I say find, like, it could be Grant Bricks, it could be Tyler Kanak or Brock Knudsen or Grant Segrin, like guys who have been in the program for 2 years. In the case of Knack and Knudsen, Bricks has been at Nebraska for 1. Like, if you're going to find somebody in the spring, it can be from that group too. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's find someone from the outside, in addition to getting a bona fide starter, which I think Pritchett, if he comes in, he's a bona fide starter. Day one, he is a starting tackle for sure. And Gatula, like, he's got the experience. He's done it. I think you like where his progress. So you feel okay. But you still need more depth, and you still got to figure out what's going on the inside of that offensive line. To me, center is a big question as you lose Ben Scott. Like, Sam Sledge has been in the program for a couple of years too, but you haven't been able to play him in any kind of meaningful moments. And I just don't know if that's Nebraska's answer. Whereas Justin Evans, it could be. Like, Evans could slide over and play center after playing guard for the last couple of years. And maybe that's where Corcoran comes in and helping provide some depth at guard, if Justin Evans is who you want to look at center. Like, getting a couple of
linemen for years with Corcoran. Like, that's just where he's best suited. And so then the question arises, Mitch, like, why is this like this? Why has it been like this a couple years in a row now? And why has it proven so difficult for Nebraska to go get good players out of the transfer portal, specifically at that position, or I think more importantly, their lack of development at that position. And maybe it's the answer it always is, which is coaching staff turnover, and you're up and down, and guys are leaving and coming in, and all that stuff. It feels like Nebraska has sort of an identification problem at the position, as well. Like, it hasn't really gotten that right in a long time. We're talking about offensive tackle.
Yeah. Look, there's more continuity on the coaching staff on the offensive line than there is anywhere else.
Yeah.
Donovan Raiola is the longest tenured coach on the Nebraska staff. It was with Scott Frost and Mickey Joseph for the last year of their run in Joseph's only year in 2022. And then it was the lone coach retained by Matt Rhule. So, like, what Nebraska wants to do, like, systematically, fundamentally on the offensive line, has been entrenched for longer than it has at any other spot on the field. And you see Nebraska making changes this offseason at wide receivers coach, in the secondary with the coach there, defensive line, adding an outside linebackers coach. Those are the positions where it's having success in the portal and being able to bring in players. And some of that, I think, is just that there are more wide receivers and defensive backs available to a team that's looking for those players in the transfer portal. Linebacker is somewhat of the same story, but it's not such a drastic difference that you should be able to take swings and get players for market value, or get players because of what you have to sell as a program at really just about everywhere else other than on the offensive line. Like, there's something else going on within the dynamic. If it's they're not doing as well of they're not selling the program as well, or selling that position as well when offensive linemen come in, or if offensive linemen are looking for something different that Nebraska doesn't offer, like in its coaching style. I don't know exactly what it is. Like, I mean, you can look at Donovan Raiola, and say, all right, he's not quite as dynamic, perhaps, not quite as, like, outgoing, maybe not as much of a natural recruiter when it comes to appealing to these players if they're coming on campus. But to me, that's oversimplified, because when you get to know Donnie, like, he is a good guy, and I think he should be able to appeal to players when they come in for visits from the portal.
Well, I think it's just proven difficult, and I think this is unique to the position around college football, not necessarily at Nebraska. But like, I'm looking at recruiting class lists right now, and the last time that Nebraska got a highly rated tackle that they had to compete for,
in the portal?
No, in recruiting is Bryce Benhart.
Well,
I guess Bricks as well from last year, right? So then that hasn't come to fruition yet. But I was thinking
as far as somebody who panned out, yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, it hasn't necessarily come to fruition yet. So I mean, that's a long gap. We're talking about 2019 to 2024. In between those type of players, and they've taken tackles who they thought, all right, we could develop these guys. I mean, even I'm looking at the class of 19 where Benhart came in. Now you had, you also brought in Brant Banks in that class, and he transferred out, but long-term kind of developmental guy. Matthew Anderson was in that class, long-term developmental guy, didn't pan out. But it's just, I just think it's hard at that position. And that's not an excuse. Nebraska has to do it just like all their contemporaries have to do it. But man, it's like this is years and years and years. I think Nebraska has to recruit and develop that position because of what we're seeing right now and how difficult it has been for them and others to go out and plug guys in the transfer portal. It's just been really hard, and it costs a lot of money to do so. So Nebraska has to get better at recruiting, identifying, and developing those players at that position, just like a lot of teams around the country do. But Nebraska's seeing a big hole in their roster right now.
Let's just quickly mention what the timeline might look like on Pritchett's decision. So he just went in the portal. Alabama played Michigan on New Year's Day in the ReliaQuest Bowl, and then the news started to come out on the weekend, on Saturday, that Pritchett was going to be moving on from Alabama. He went into the portal on Sunday, and then on Monday, we heard, I believe On3 reported the news that he's going to be visiting Nebraska this week. So this will be presumably his first visit. And does he want to take multiple visits? Looks, school is starting in a couple of weeks. You want to get entrenched with your new teammates. We don't know. Like the tackles that we've seen go in the portal that Nebraska's brought in for visits have gone on several trips. And, unless you're just going to blow someone away, like say, hey, we don't even want to mess around. Like whatever the market value is, increase it by 50%. And that's the offer right there. Like you're not going to go somewhere else and get a better offer. So if you want to come here, like, let's get this thing done. And I mean, I think Nebraska should be aggressive, and that could help. And that can be a part of the reason maybe Nebraska's recruiting approach to these offensive tackles who are at such a premium in the portal. And we saw this last year too, when Nebraska went after some offensive tackles and did not win. It's like sometimes Nebraska in recruiting, whether it's a high school player or out of the portal, will take a less aggressive approach. Like, come see us. We'll let you know what we've got. And then, take your time. And if you want to look at some other options, that's okay. Like maybe that's not the way to do it with offensive tackles. You might want to put turn off the heat a little bit when they come into town on a cold week in January and say, okay, we've got this offer for you. It's good for 48 hours. Like, take it or leave it.
Yeah, that position is clearly different.
You got to do it different.
Yeah, and you have to approach it from a different standpoint. All right, when we return here, a big opportunity for Nebraska basketball tonight, coming off of a win. Can they avoid what happened to them last time they had a monster win at home, a loss at Iowa? Back after this. But first, a word from our friends from the FanDuel Sportsbook. From big upsets, game-winning drives, and everything in between, the NFL playoffs are better with the FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL playoffs, same-game parlays, and so much more. So I'm looking at the slate for this weekend. Let's just take a look at Saturday. You go Saturday winners, Saturday favorites, Chargers, Ravens, Bills. You line them all up in a 3-game Saturday NFL playoff parlay. That's plus 136 right now on the FanDuel Sportsbook. So
get the CFP in there.
You could throw some CFP games in there as well if you want that number to grow even larger. Whatever you want to do, however you want to line it up for yourself, Head to FanDuel.com and join today, and once again, get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
All right, final segment on this Tuesday, January 7th, 2025. Still getting used to saying that. 45 squared is the year this year. So we will live through one of those kind of situations, unless you plan to be like 120 years old. So
right,
little nugget there. Tonight, by the way, how are things? It's cold. For me, life kind of returned to normal here today, even a little bit yesterday, although more so today, like first day back to school for the kids on Monday, a little bit hectic. Today was nice, Connor. I just got in the car, dropped off Zach at middle school, ran into my Gretna Hy-Vee, got some coffee. I just felt like life was normal again. December was wild, was probably traveling for two weeks or close to that through the entire month. And I feel like things are settling back in.
Yeah, Monday reality sort of hits everybody. Whatever it was, like maybe people are listening to this are like, I didn't have any days off, so what are you guys talking about? Or I just had Christmas and New Year's off. What are you guys talking about? Either way, for the last couple of weeks, it was different. It was bumpy. You were traveling in different places. You were working at different times. So yeah, we're back into the grind now. I'm amazed. I'll tell you this, and this will ease us into basketball. I'm amazed at how light my schedule is. There's very few, like Creighton basketball games or Nebraska women's basketball games that I'm involved in. Like it's nothing like it was in November and December. This is a light slate. I have
the whole month. Or are you talking about this week?
I'm talking about, this week there's a women's basketball game on Wednesday where Nebraska plays Michigan State. And then as far as those two teams are concerned, there's not another thing until next Tuesday.
We need to find something else for you to do.
Yeah, I need another
you
job.
Got like any pro volleyball options in the works here?
Well, there's definitely options for teams that I could work with, but no, I'm not diving into those waters quite yet.
Okay, well, Husker
see.
Hoops tonight at Iowa, 7 p.m. Find it on Peacock. Save yourself the outrage and just go subscribe to Peacock for a month or something if you're not already on board. Carver-Hawkeye Arena. Iowa leads the Big Ten in scoring at 84.9 points per game. And the Hawkeyes last time out, they hit their average. They got 85 and gave up 116 in a loss at Wisconsin last Friday. So they are 10-4. They are a different team at home, it seems. 8-1 at home. The lone loss coming back in early December, to number 3 ranked Iowa State. Did you know Iowa State was ranked number 3 in the country? That's impressive.
They're a real life national championship contender. Get ready for it. TJ Otzelberger
got to excite Fred Hoiberg.
Yeah.
Fred's got to be happy about that.
Yeah, no doubt. So, first of all, speaking of Big Ten basketball, did you happen to catch any of the disaster car wreck that happened between Ohio State and Minnesota last night, late night on FS1?
Absolutely not. I saw some scores coming out of the Rutgers Wisconsin game and then called it a night.
It was a train wreck. It went to double overtime. Minnesota in overtime, they were up by 2, missed a free throw which would have helped seal the game. Ohio State got the rebound and tried to push the length of the floor, and Minnesota guys didn't know what the score was, fouled a 90% free throw shooter, and then he, of course, made the 2 free throws, which forced double overtime. It was hilarious. Ohio State ended up winning that game and holding off Minnesota in the second overtime.
Why is Minnesota in such a bad place with its basketball program? Like, Minnesota should not be as bad as it's been a while now. Like, you're talking about just like bringing up the bottom of the Big Ten. It's a money thing, is what you're saying. Like, they won't pay players. Yeah. Okay.
They don't have any NIL. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
That good.
All right. Well,
That
that's
good.
the challenge for if you're not Ohio State or you're not Michigan or I guess Nebraska. Nebraska is not exactly bathing in NIL resources as a basketball program either. The football resources they don't bleed over in the way that they might at some schools.
The difference though is that they actually they have good players in their state that end up at Minnesota, and then they just get stolen by other schools when they go into the transfer portal. Nebraska is just going kind of reverse. They're getting the guys as they develop. Anyway, it'll be an interesting season in the Big Ten Conference this year. A lot
of good teams, and Ohio State, at least as far as what the metrics tell you, is among those great teams. Good teams. Good. Won't say great, just like good above average teams.
Yeah.
Minnesota is not. Nebraska almost snuck into the AP top 25 on Monday. Huskers received 62 votes. They're tied with Arkansas among teams not in the poll, second most. There's one other team in there at number 2. Nebraska would be tied for 27th essentially in the rankings. I feel like a solid week this week. I don't know. Does a 1-1 week for Nebraska on the road against Iowa and Purdue get the Huskers over the hump into the top 25? I know Fred Hoiberg does not care about this. He was asked about it Monday at his press conference if he pays attention to the poll and uses that as some form of motivation, like Nebraska at 12-2 with 2 wins against ranked teams, the road win against Creighton, probably has the resume to be a top 25 team, but then the voters go through it and they're like, oh, Nebraska, okay, put them over here. They've never won an NCAA tournament game. They're not in my poll.
Definitely a factor. Nebraska has to do extra work in order to get the national love. There's no doubt about that. I'll say for this game, and you talked about Iowa a little bit. It's a weird. I don't know if I love the matchup for Nebraska. We know what Iowa always has been, which is we are super skilled, and we have good offensive players, and we're capable of scoring. Enough. It's a top 25 offense in the country, as Iowa always is. And defensively, it's not very good, but Nebraska wants to kind of muck it up a little bit and make it a dirty grinder. But they also have to make shots on offense, and that's something that has just been inconsistent for them. Sans Bryce Williams this year, so Nebraska's going to have to make shots. They'll get shots. They'll get open shots. They have to make them in order to avoid the upset against Iowa. But on the defensive end, Nebraska, I'm looking at their KenPom page right now, and their defense has a number 10 next to it in terms of their adjusted efficiency, which is just awesome, spectacular for a team that doesn't boast any defensive player of the year candidates, or I mean, maybe Juwan Gary is.
Juwan Gary thinks that he's a defensive player of the year candidate.
Let me correct that. They don't necessarily boast anything that would blow you away from from
crazy athleticism, guys running around. They're not Syracuse in the in the matchup zone. No, from the Boeheim days. No, absolutely not. They don't have that kind of athleticism. You put Sam Hoiberg and Andrew Morgan out there, they're playing good defense because of 100% hustle and that's great. And I think that's where this matchup is a bit different for Nebraska, because the Huskers have played decent defense the last year or two. Before that, not so much, but not to this level, statistically, at least. This is a defense that, as you said, is one of the best in the country, one of the best in the Big Ten, and as far as what it's producing to this point. And maybe that's something that gets in the way of Iowa. I don't necessarily love for Nebraska that Iowa is coming off of that performance where it gave up 116 points and it's coming back home. If this game was on the road, sure. But, I would think that if there's ever a game where Iowa's going to play a little bit of defense, it's this one.
Yeah. And on the same, on the other side, this game will have Nebraska's attention too, right? Mm-hmm. They know, it's been talked about all week what happened to them last year after they beat Purdue. So that's
they're 2-10. 2-10 at Carver-Hawkeye since going into the Big Ten in 2012. Ooh, it's not. Wow. It's funny because if this game was in Lincoln, Nebraska would have a 75%, 80% win expectancy. You put it in Iowa City, and it's 35%, 40%. Yeah. So
it's 48 right now on KenPom. Okay. It's a 1-point loss, so it's tough.
Okay. A little higher than I thought.
A big night, and then they go on the road and try to do it at Mackey on Sunday. All right. That is it for us today. Plenty to come throughout the rest of the week. But we appreciate this, you making this your first listen today. For your second listen, we have that lined up for you as well. The Locked On Big Ten podcast, where Craig puts the Big Ten first. Find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever you find your podcasts.